wine has a unique combination. And my challenge making wine is to show the uniqueness of my place through my cosmovision, that is respect the place. Try to be the less influential that you can in the expression of the wines, and try that the wines talk about the place. But a little bit about the three histories. The first is that I'm the third generation in the family making wine. The picture is my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather had a building company. He didn't have any relationship with wine, but where we live, and I will show you in some pictures, is a desert. So the only way to cultivate in the area where we are cultivating is with irrigation. And my grandfather used to have a building company, but his passion or his concern was the use of water. So he developed in his company a very efficient irrigation system. And he bought the property near to Mendoza with the idea not to dedicate his life to cultivate vineyards. His idea was at the beginning, showed how his irrigation system worked and sold his irrigation system to other growers. But luckily for me, he fell in love with agriculture. He discovered that his really passion was the agriculture, so he decided to continue planting vineyards. My grandmother always were working with him, but the big growth of the family is when my father, that I put a picture of my father and the third generation, but when my father joined the family, Jose, he decided to put his life in wine. He said, okay, no, my life is not the building company, my life is the wine, and he started planting more and more vineyards. And today, in the third generation, you can see me and my brother and my sister there. The picture is old, so I'm quite younger in the picture, but I'm the oldest in the family, and I decided to put my life also in wine. So I manage today in the family the vineyards and the winery. Julia, that is in the middle, she's running the hospitality area in our winery, because we have two wineries in Mendoza, and in each winery we have restaurants and we have tourist centers. So we receive every year near to 60,000 people that come to have an experience, a Zuccardi experience with us. And Miguel, the youngest, Miguel brought a new activity for the family, that is olive oil. That is a new activity for the family, but it's an old activity in the area. But I can say that Miguel today is the best olive oil producer in the country. But what happened with the third generation is that I feel, and I think I'm talking also for my brother and my sister, we are not continuous what our family started. Yes, it's true. We continue doing wine or olive oil, but the challenge is that every one of us in the new generation brought a new activity for the family. And my work has been that my family used to cultivate in an area that was near to Mendoza, but because I started cultivating and making wine, I discovered that really the place where I want to cultivate is the Uco Valley. So today the family has 8 vineyards in the Uco Valley, because was my vision, move the center of gravity of production to the Uco Valley. And in the presentation, I will explain you why. One thing that I want that you know about Argentina is that many people think that Argentina is New World wine country. But when you see the history of the area where we cultivate, we are more old world than new world. If you see the figures, Argentina is the 5th world largest wine producer, but is the 10th world largest wine exporter. Why? Because for many years, all the wine that we made in Argentina was drinking in Argentina. And so 75% of the wine that we make in Argentina is drinking in Argentina. So our beverage is wine. Our national beverage is wine. And Argentina, if you see in tradition, because the wine came through the immigration that we have from Italy and from Spain, wine is part of our culture. So I consider that Argentina in the South Hemisphere is completely different than the other wine countries in South Hemisphere, because we had an old history making wine, but also for many years, all the wine was drinking in the country. And in the 90s, Argentina started exporting. So Argentina is quite new in the export market, but it's very old making wine. And for me, this is very important because wine is our passion. And if you see, you have close to 900 wineries making wine in Argentina. You have completely different sizes of winery because the social structure is like old world. So for me, if you ask me, remember, Argentina is old world in new world with a long tradition cultivating and making wine. But if you see the Argentinian map that you have there, you can see that 95% of the wine areas are near to the Andes mountain. Remember that when you see Argentina, you have Argentina, then you have the Andes mountain in the middle, and you have Chile in the other side. So Chile and Argentina are very close areas, wine areas, but are divided by the mountain. And the mountain create completely different situations in one side and in the other side. Where I live is here, it's in the middle, that is Mendoza area. But if I have to give you a definition of 95% of our wines are mountain wines. Everything that happened in our area is in relation with the Andes. But let's go to the area where I'm cultivating and where I live, that is Mendoza. Mendoza, that you see there a picture, Mendoza produces 90% of the wine of the country. So it's the main important wine region. And look at how interesting is this picture that you can see if you go to the Pacific Ocean and you see Chile, look at how green is Chile because the influence of the ocean. But when you arrive to the Andes mountain and you cross the Andes mountain, you can see, I put in green these areas. You can see how gray is the area where we are cultivating. Why? Because we have no influence from the Pacific and we are very far from the Atlantic. So the area where we live is a desert. And if you put attention to the green areas that I put that are cultivating in Mendoza, you can see that all these areas are near to the rivers because the water that we use to irrigate come from the snowmelt from the rivers. And if you see the map of all the Uco Valley, all the Mendoza, you can see that the Uco Valley is the area that is closest to the mountain. So if I like to say that we make mountain wines, I'm trying to cultivate in the area that is closer to the mountain, so the area that has more mountain influence. But when you go to the Uco Valley, the first thing that we have to know that the Uco Valley for many years was considered like one region, but when you do a zoom in the Uco Valley, you need to understand that it's necessary to divide because the diversity that we have in terms of soil and in terms of water and in terms of weather is very big. I will tell you during the presentation many names. I don't want that you remember all the names that I'm telling you. I want that you understand that the diversity that we have in our area is huge. And I want that you can see that for me, the future of our wine areas is in relation with the place where the grapes are coming from. So if you want to go in deeper in the Uco Valley, you can see, that the Uco Valley could be divided in many different villages. But let's come back to the previous concept. When we talk about mountain wines, it's because the water, the weather, and the soil are determined by the Andes. But when we talk about the weather, the first thing that you have to know, look at how close this is our winery in the Uco Valley. Look at how close is our winery from the mountain. So when I tell you that we make mountain wines, it's really because the vineyards are very close to the mountains. And if I have to give you a definition about our weather, we cultivate in a high altitude desert where altitude is the main important factor, but light is another very important factor. And if I show you this graphic, you can see that in the area where we cultivate, we are isolated from the Pacific Ocean. So the Pacific Ocean comes with cold and humid winds, rain or snow. In this time of the year, the mountain is completely white. and cross extremely dry to the other side. So we live in a high altitude desert because we are close to the Pacific, no influence, far from the Atlantic because we cultivate far more than 1,000 kilometers far from the Atlantic. So the first definition is a high altitude desert. And why altitude is so important? Because look at how is our area where we cultivate without irrigation. Really is a desert. But every time that you go close to the mountain, you're going up in altitude. So what means that? That every time that you go up in altitude, you are moving to a cooler weather. Yes? I'm not saying better or worse, but every time that you climb and you go up in cultivation, you are moving to a cooler weather. And so when we talk about altitude, when we say 1,300 meters or 1,200 meters, we are not talking that higher is better. We are talking that higher is cooler. One thing that for me is important, I believe that the best areas where I cultivate are higher than 1,000 meters. But every time that you go up, you are talking about the styles of wines that you are making. The other thing that the Andes or the weather where we live give to us is the light. We live in a place that we have more than 300 days with sunlight, with four seasons very divided. The summer is very warm and the winter is very cold, but always we have a blue sky. Why? Because we live in a desert, and this blue sky creates that we have a very pure light because we are close to the sun, but also we have no any humidity that filter the light. So our wines talk about a pureness of light. So it's normal that in Argentinian wines you can find a lot of fruit expression is because the pureness of the sky. I told you that we live in a desert and the only way to cultivate is with water, and the mountain create the desert because the mountain stop all the ocean influence, but also the mountain give to us the solution because we used to irrigate the snow melt that come from the mountain. Now the mountain in our area is like this. So we have a beautiful landscape because during the winter, all the mountains are white, and during the summer, all this snow melt, and it's the water that we use to irrigate. But in order that you understand how deep is our desert, with the water from the snow melt, we only can cultivate 3% of our surface. The other is not possible because the water is not enough to cultivate more surface. And the third thing that the Andes give to us are the soils. And I'm a fanatic of soils. I can tell you that in the last 10 years, I have spent more time under the land, exploring and learning about our soils. And I can tell you that one of the main characteristics of the Uco Valley is this desert in high altitude, but the other that create a lot of diversity is the soils that we have. And if I have to give you an explanation about the soils that we have alluvial soils. What means that? Alluvial soils means that millions of years ago, we had big glaciers in the mountain, then the earth heated, all these glaciers melt, and all the water came from the Andes mountain to the flat areas. Is the way that you can see in the picture. And this water used to have so many energy that could move stones from the mountain to the flat area. Not only stones, silt, clay, and sand. So when you talk about alluvial movement, you have to know that all the material where we are cultivating came from the Andes. So we walk and we plant vineyards on material that millions of years ago was in the Andes. But this is alluvial fan or our alluvial soils is the way that the soils were created. The question is, all the alluvial soils are the same? And the answer is no. Why? Because the alluvial soils are extremely diverse. And this diversity has two sources. One is that when you are, imagine that the alluvial fan start here. when you are close to the beginning of the alluvial fan, what happened? The water had a lot of energy. So the water was very concentrated and could move big materials. But when you go to the middle, the water spread, lost energy, so the size of material that could move is smaller, and when you move to the end of the alluvial fan, the water didn't have so much energy, so couldn't move stones. So when you see the same alluvial fan and you do a cut, you can see that the same alluvial fan, depending if you are close from the beginning or far from the beginning of the alluvial fan, is the material that you are going to have. So one thing that happens every time that we go closer to the Andes is that we are going to cultivate in a higher altitude, that means cooler, but also the soils has more stones because the energy that the water had when the soils were formed was bigger. So the first source of diversity in terms of soil is how close you are from the Andes. But the second, and this is a picture that I like to show because how to recognize an alluvial soil. When you go to any vineyard and you see round stones, immediately you have to say, this is an alluvial soil. Why? Because these stones came rolling with the energy of the water. And another characteristic of the alluvial soils is that you have different layers, yes? Because the movement was not happen in one big movement. The movement were millions and millions of years of glaciers, melt, movement, glaciers, melt, movement. So the materials, the soils were formed through millions of years. I told you that all the alluvial soils were different, and the source of diversity is if you were close of the Andes. But the second source of diversity is that when you see the Andes mountain, this is a picture of our vineyard in Piedra Infinita in the south of the Uco Valley in an area that the name is Altamira. When you see the Andes mountain, you think that all the Andes mountain is the same, but it's not the same. Why? Because you have to imagine that when the Andes mountains were formed was a crash of two plates. So part of the Andes mountain was out of the water and part of the Andes mountain was under the water. So when you see a map of geology of the Andes mountain, the first thing that you have to see is that you have three different chains of mountain. The Precordillera, that is the oldest chain, where the Uco Valley, that is in the south of the Precordillera, has no any Precordillera influence, but in front we have the Cordillera Frontal and the Cordillera Principal. So what means that? That when you see this picture and you say the big Andes mountain, you have to know that you have two chains, and every chain has a completely different geology. And if the soils were formed because the alluvial fans that came from the Andes, we have to know that in the areas where we are going to cultivate, we have a lot of diversity, because it's not the same if the material comes from the frontal cordillera or if the material comes from the principal cordillera. And what creates that, for example, we have a unique combination of materials that could be granite and calcium carbonate. When we talk about calcium carbonate, that is this white covering layer that you see out in the surface of the stone, this came from the bottom of the ocean. And you say, how in my area where I'm cultivating isolated from the ocean, I have material that came from the ocean? Is because this, imagine that before the Andes mountain was not there, then this plate crash, this Andes mountain go up, so part of the bottom of the ocean rise to 6,000 meters, and then with the alluvial movements, move to our area. So the area where we are cultivating has unique complex in terms that you have materials that is impossible to find in combination in other areas. And you can find in our vineyard fossils, and you can see how the roots grow hugging this calcium carbonate material. But what happened? I told you that the Uco Valley, and I don't want to make a mess, but if we come back, sorry, for 1 minute to this picture, I told you that the Uco Valley is one region, but is divided in different villages. And every village has a different combination of weather and soil, a different combination of altitude. For example, if you cultivate in this area where I'm showing, is you have in altitude, let me see in feet. In feet is maybe a little bit less than 3,000 feet. But when you go to the west of the Uco Valley, we are cultivating near to 6,000 feet of altitude. So in 20 kilometers, you duplicate the altitude. So you have inside of the Uco Valley, if you are closer to the Andes or far to the Andes, completely different regions. But also, if you see the soils that you have here, you can realize that the diversity of soils that we have, because this way that the soils were formed, is huge. So look at 5 different areas in the Uco Valley. Look at the difference in terms of soil that you have. Look at the difference in terms of altitude that you have. And every wine that we make in these different places has a completely different expression. So my challenge and my way to see how to make wine is that if I want to make wines that talk about uniqueness and talk about identity, the only way to do this is talking about the place where the grapes are coming from. Because if I give you a bottle of wine from this area, 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 and I put in all of them only in the label, the grape, for example, Malbec, what I'm telling to you, I'm telling that all the wines are the same. And for me, the most interesting thing that we have in our place is the uniqueness of the diversity and the unique combination that we have in every place where we cultivate. Any question until here? Because I have been talking a lot.
People can unmute themselves if they wish.
If anyone wants to do a question, feel free. Okay, we continue. So the first wine that you have, because I have one wine that you don't have there, that is the Q Chardonnay, you have the Q Malbec in front of you, is trying to show the expression of the Uco Valley. So every time that I make a wine and I rise in the portfolio, I try to be more specific about the origin of the wines. So when we talk about Q, we are talking about the Uco Valley. And if I have to give you a definition of the Uco Valley, it's a desert in high altitude, but because it's the highest area in our region, has more relationship with the mountain, so it's a cooler weather with more stony soils. So I have a Chardonnay that I don't know that you don't have there, but David asked me if I can talk a little bit of Chardonnay. One thing that is interesting and is happening in the Uco Valley is that, let me, 1 second. I think it's better like this. One thing when I was child and when I grew making wine in Argentina is that for many years was considered that we had weather only for red wines, and white wines were not considered like something very interesting that Argentina can do. Something that changed in the last years is that we understand that if any time that we go up in altitude, we are moving to a cooler weather. So we have the possibility to make white wines in cold but sunny weathers. So this Chardonnay, that is the Chardonnay Q, that I try to put a lot of information in the label. So if you read the label, say Chardonnay, say Uco Valley, but say also from which village from the Uco Valley is coming, is trying to show this freshness that the weather gives to us and this energy that the sun gives to our grapes. So in general, I vinify in a very simple way, in a direct press, but the grapes come from 2 areas in Tupungato, from 3,500 feet to 5,000 feet of altitude. So we choose high altitude areas. And if we choose high altitude areas, we are closer to the alluvial fan. So the soils that we have in this Chardonnay are very stony and full of calcaire. That for me, calcaire is very important in whites because give a lot of texture to the wine. And the way to vinify is extremely simple. It's a direct press that I divide the juice and I ferment half in concrete, that we are going to talk a little bit more about concrete in the last wine. And the other half was fermented in barrel, but not in new barrels, in used barrel, 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, because we were talking about identity, about uniqueness. For me, there are 3 things that we have to be careful if we want to show the expression of the place. The first is overripe. When you overripe and you rise a lot, even alcohol, you lose sense of place. The second is extraction. When you over extract the wines in the winery, when you over do a maceration, for me, you make that every wine can be closer to the other. And the third thing is over oak. Oak is a great material for aged wines, but it's not part of the field. It's something that we use in the vineyard, in the winery. So my challenge is that I like the use of oak, but I try that when you smell and taste any of our wines, you are not going to talk about the expression of the oak, because I'm looking to talk about the expression of the place, and I'm trying to talk about the balance. But let's go to the Malbec. Everybody has the Malbec? If we go to the Malbec Q that you have there, that is this wine. Again, it's a wine that will talk about all the region. So it's a wine that will talk about the Uco Valley. Remember that every time that I go up, I try to be more specific about the place. So this wine comes from the Uco Valley, but I also put the villages where it's coming from the Uco Valley. So if you see the label, you're going to read Paraje Altamira and Vista Flores. I told you that I don't want that you remember all the names, but I want that you understand that depend where the grapes are coming is the village. It's like the map that I have in my back, that every village has a unique expression because the combination of weather and soil. And this is a Malbec that comes from 2 areas in the Uco Valley, 2 villages. One is Paraje Altamira, that is an area in the south, high and very calcium carbonate soils, and the other is Vista Flores, that is in the middle, a little bit deeper soils, and with the stones, but not with calcium carbonate. So the expression that you have in the wine is different. But for me, I like, because I feel that the Altamira give the backbone of the wine, and Vista Flores give the flesh of the wine. So it's the way for me to build a wine from the Uco Valley. If you smell the wine, you're going to find that you not only have red or black or oaky aromas. For me, wine has to be like a picture of the landscape. So I try that my wines talk also about the natural vegetation that we have surrounding our vineyards. So it's for that I leave a lot of natural vegetation growing in the vineyards. I leave part of the vineyard that I have never planted with vineyard, and I live with natural vegetation, because the natural vegetation for me has a very big influence in the wine. So when you smell this wine, you are going to find the red fruit style of forward that come from the sun, from this light that we have, and also the Malbec is a very fruity grape. But also you are going to find some herbs, a little bit of pepper, black pepper especially, or white pepper, or some bushes that we call in our area like jarilla, or this kind of aromas. And for me, wine needs complexity. Wine needs layers. So something that I challenge a lot is try to avoid overripe, because when you overripe, you lose all the layers that you can find in the wine. And try that my wines talk about this. It's like go to the mountains and smell the natural vegetation. For me, we need to catch this feeling in our wine. And then in the mouth, we are going to find a a good balance between has to be juicy with a little bit of texture. Texture is something that for me is extremely important. And in the end, I always like to have a little bit of salinity, not salty, but salinity. All this combination of juicy, texture, and salinity for me gives a lot of complex to the wine. But I try that my wines has been longer than wider. And when the wine finish, has to leave us all this freshness, texture, a little bit of juicy, acidity, saltiness, that for me is complexity. And I try when I make a wine, try not to be big guys, try to be like marathonists, wines that are based on the structure, on the bone, because something that for me is crucial is the aging potential. If you want to show that a region has potential, you need to show how the wines age. And when we make the wines, we are thinking to make wines that will age very well. The third wine that you have there is the Polígonos Cabernet Franc. I told you that every time that I go up in the range, I try to be more specific about the place where the grapes are coming from. So if in Q we talk about the Uco Valley, when we go to Polígonos, we talk about one village in the Uco Valley that is San Pablo. San Pablo is a village at 5,500 feet of altitude, so it's really high. It's really close to the mountain. And because it's high and close to the mountain, it's extremely cold. So there is the last grape that I harvest, is the last area that I harvest in the Uco Valley. But this wine is made with Cabernet Franc. And I have to tell you something. If you ask me which is the main important grape in Argentina, for sure I will answer Malbec, because I feel that Malbec has a great adaptation to our place and has a long history. Malbec was not a marketing plan. Malbec was something that happened in the field. But in the last years, I can see that another grape that has another red grape that has a fantastic adaptation is the Cabernet Franc. So the surface of Cabernet Franc is growing in Argentina because the adaptation that has to the place is fantastic. So we are going to take one of the most extreme Cabernet Franc from Argentina, because it's Cabernet Franc that is a very late harvest grape coming from an area that is the coldest area in the Uco Valley. This wine was fermented in concrete, but was aging in foudre. You know what is foudre? It's big cask, big oak cask. Because for me, Cabernet Franc, because the structure, because the quantity of tannins, needs a little bit of oak, but not new oak, and a little bit of micro-oxygenation. So it's for that that I use big cask. I use big foudres. Let me show you a picture in order that you can see the winery. I will cross the vineyards that we have in the Uco Valley, that we have 6 vineyards in the Uco Valley, but also we have a winery, that the winery is all concrete vats. And I will explain you with the last wine why concrete is so important for us. And we work with concrete, but also we work with big sizes of oak. And it's like when you go to Tuscany or when you go to Barolo, you can find this size of oak. And this is part of the culture of Argentina. If you see the old wineries were made with this kind of a size of oak cask. And for me, it's a little bit back to the future. It's take all techniques to make the wines that we think that will show the future. So Polígonos is a range that talk about the Uco Valley, but inside of the Uco Valley talk about some villages in the Uco Valley. And this is a Cabernet Franc that come from an area that the name is San Pablo. Remember, 5,500 feet of altitude, one of the coldest areas in the Uco Valley. And the last wine that we have is the Concreto. Yes? Concreto come from a village in the Uco Valley that the name is Altamira. It's a village, where we have our winery. And the characteristic of this village is that the soils are extremely stony and extremely calcaire, with a lot of calcaire material. So when I started with this wine in 2014, imagine that before that, when you talk about Malbec, you thought in a very concentrated, powerful, and dark wine. And my challenge was to show that if you cultivate in high altitude areas and if you cultivate in soils that has a lot of complexity, you can make Malbec that can be more concentrated in the texture than in the concentration. So I decided to make this wine that is a Malbec that is all vinified with whole bunch. We put the whole bunch, but we crush with our feet. I tried not to, I like to use whole bunch, but we like to break these bunches, because if you put whole and you don't break, you can have a carbonic maceration. And we are trying not to have a carbonic maceration. We are trying that the wine talk about the place. But we like to vinify with the whole bunch because the stem, for me, help in the backbone of the wine. And the wine, our winery, is all concrete. So the wine is concreto, the name, because was fermenting and aging in concrete vats. And why concrete is so important for me? The first thing that I have to tell you is that you can make a great wine in concrete, a great wine in oak, a great wine in stainless steel. And you can make a very bad wine in concrete, a very bad wine in stainless steel, and a very bad wine in oak. All depend the area where you are cultivating, and all depend how you cultivate the vineyards. So I like to say that first we cultivate wines. Everything that we do is start in the place, in the selection of the place, and then in the way that we work in the vineyard. And in the winery, our challenge is to keep all the work or all the detail that we make in the, we take care in the vineyard. But then in the winery, we do the fermentation in concrete, because these concrete vats that you are seeing were built with sand, stone, and water from our property. So the connection that we have between the vineyard and the winery is very strong, because all the material came from our property. And why I like concrete? For many things. First is because when you see the wall, the thickness of the wall of the concrete vat, you have like 13 centimeters. When you see a stainless steel tank, you have few millimeters. And in an area that I told you that we have big difference of temperature during the winter and during the summer, and we have big difference of temperature during the morning and the night, the changes of temperature are very fast. So when you work with concrete, you isolate a little bit what is happening inside of the concrete vat and outside. The other thing that the concrete gives to us is that the concrete don't give any flavor to the wine, but leave that microoxygenation happen. So for me, concrete not only gives us the possibility to ferment, also the possibility to age. And Malbec is a grape that I think don't like too much microoxygenation, but need microoxygenation. So concrete gives me the possibility of have a microoxygenation, but less than if I age in an oak barrel, for example. But the most important thing is philosophy. I feel really very comfortable working with the material that come from my vineyard and a natural material. So Concreto is a Malbec that come from Altamira. Altamira is a village that is in the southwest of the Uco Valley, where the soils are very calcaire, are full of chalk. And the challenge here with this wine is try to avoid the sweetness and focus on the texture. For me, when we talk about tasting, many times we talk about flavors and we forget that the tongue can feel texture. And this texture for me comes from the soil, and remember me like lick, for example, a chalk. When you lick a chalk, you have the same feeling of this kind of materials. Sorry, I think we are on time. I talk so fast but I don't know if any of you want to make me a question or
Yes,
whatever.
thank you. I think you did an incredible job of touching base on most everything, but we did have a really good question. If you could cover real quick, maybe the pyramid of the different ranges of Zuccardi and what the philosophy is behind, just a quick
Yes.
philosophy behind
Yes.
why there are different labels.
Wait a minute. If you see the labels, this is the pyramid. Q are wines at the beginning that talk about the Uco Valley. Polígonos are wines that talk about villages in the Uco Valley. Then if we move to alluvional here, are wines that talk about certain areas inside of the villages. So you can't use all the village to make alluvional. You need to use part of the village. If you go up, you are talking about vineyard or single vineyard wines, that we have a beautiful word that is finca. Finca Piedra Infinita, Finca Canaluco. We are talking about the uniqueness of one property. And if we rise one step more, we are going to talk about wines that come from parcels, from specific plots inside of our property. And in the middle, we have wines that I call wines of viticultor. It's like winemakers' wines, because are wines that came more from the history of the family. So I use the name of my grandmother, the name of my grandfather, the name of my father to create this wine. It's like a tribute to my family, but also I make concreto. That concreto is a wine that changed my way to see the wine, because concreto changed a little bit the history of how you can see a Malbec.
Yes.
So every time that we go up, we try to be more specific about where the grapes are coming from.
And while we're on this slide, and you heard, excuse me, you heard Sebastian refer to the finca wines, or they're like single vineyard wines. He is so humble that he won't often talk about, but most of you may have heard about the 2016 Finca Piedra Infinita Malbec that was awarded the 100 points from Wine Advocate. Not something we like to hang our hat on, but certainly very well respected nod to both the great Malbec and to the place of the Uco Valley and in Paraje Altamira, and of course to the vineyard itself.
Thank you, David. I don't like to talk a lot about the scores, because I make wine not for the scores. I make wine because I love the place where I born and because it's my passion. But thank you, David, for telling.
Yeah. And then there was another really great question going back to the chat about salinity, which I love.
Yes.
So you said, what was the origin in the vineyard? It was from Kevin Butler. Thanks, Kevin. What is the origin in the vineyard of salinity that you're looking for? He's heard about salinity coming from volcanic soils or proximity to the ocean, of course. But it seems like they're different in the Uco Valley.
It's true, but the calcium carbonate, the calcare was created by the shelf of the ocean life, millions and millions of years at the bottom of the ocean. When you see how the wines that grow on this kind of soils, you can feel that this salinity is there. And if you lick on a stone, you can feel also the salinity on this. But it's not weather salinity, it's more soil salinity. It's like when you go to Jerez, that the salinity, part of the salinity come from the kind of soil that you have. But it's not salt, it's salinity. It's for me, it's not that this wine is salty. It's a combination of texture, salinity, juicy. This is the combination. But I love, because I told you, I'm a drinker before a winemaker. And every time that I open a bottle of wine, I want to drink the bottle, but also I want to share with food. And when you have wines with more texture, you have the opportunity to combine with food, and the wine help you to clean the mouth.
Maybe we can take the screen away and take a few more questions here at the end.
Okay, sorry.
No. it's certainly a lot of information all collectively at once, but I think you guys get the idea of how much time and focus and passion Sebastian devotes into making his wines, into caring for the land and for the grapes, and into farming first and foremost before the wines ever make it to the winery. And it's infectious and eye-opening. From Chris, what does a AR Cab Franc compare to the Loire US?
Okay, it's a
that-
good question because when you talk about Cabernet Franc in Argentina, because the difference of altitude that we have in short distance, you can have both styles. If you see a Cabernet Franc that come from lower altitude, is more concentrated, more powerful, could be more like Bordeaux style. But when you go to 1,400 meters, sorry, 5,500 feet, like the Cabernet Franc that we are tasting now, is closer to Loire in terms of the expression, because you have more green pepper and you have more ash and you have more complexity in this kind of aroma. So for me, you can make two different completely styles, depend where you cultivate and depend who makes the wine. I like more a Loire style.
Great question, Kimberly. When we get asked that all the time about the concrete, Sebastian, how do we explain how it does not, and how is it neutral and it does not impart any flavor in the wine?
Because when you put the wine, in oak, you can feel that you have the vanilla, the chocolate, the expression that come from the oak. But when you put in concrete, you have nothing. And when you analyze the wines that come from concrete, you can see nothing. So I feel that concrete is very neutral in terms of flavor and taste.
But it's also treated before wine ever goes in.
Okay, sorry. You need to treat once before to use for first time. That the treatment is natural and very simple. It's tartaric acid, 30% in water, and then you wet the walls in order to avoid that calcium that is in the concrete goes to the wine. But you make the first time before to use the concrete vat, and after that you don't need to do any more. Okay, but one thing that is important is concrete is very poor. So you need to be careful with the cleaning. You need to be obsessive with the cleaning. We are obsessive to the cleaning because we don't want to put epoxy in the walls. We work with raw concrete.
Chris Spangler, another great question. Does concrete also import micro-oxygenation?
Yes, concrete is demonstrated through studies that concrete have micro-oxygenation, but the quantity of micro-oxygenation that you have in a concrete vat is less than the micro-oxygenation that you have in a barrel or in a foudre. But and for me, Malbec is a grape, in my view, remember, always in my view, Malbec is a grape that don't like too much a lot of micro-oxygenation. So I like also concrete in our area and with Malbec because reduce the level of micro-oxygenation. For example, with Cabernet Franc or with Cabernet Sauvignon, I like to age in barrels.
Excellent. And from Jackie, a good question. How has climate change affected viticulture and winemaking in Argentina?
We need another 45 minutes, but I will try to be very synthetic about this. You know that climate change is something that all the viticultors are very aware about what is happening. If you see North Hemisphere and South Hemisphere, in South Hemisphere, we can see until now less consequence in terms of warming. Because the North Hemisphere, you have more land than water. And in the South Hemisphere, we have more ocean than land. So we can see exactly, or we have no evidence that the average temperature is growing. But one thing that we can see is in the last 10 years, we have less snow in the mountain. So maybe the climate change affects us in terms of the quantity of the water availability. So we are going to see. But some people say that this is a cycle. For example, in the last 10 years, we didn't have very good snows during the winter, and this year we have been starting the winter with a lot of snow. So we can see in terms of temperature, maybe we are seeing in terms of water, but we need time to confirm what I'm saying. One thing that we are very lucky is that if warming happens, we can rise in the mountain in order to cultivate. So we don't need to move many kilometers. When you rise in the mountain in 10 kilometers, you change complete the conditions. But again, we have no enough evidence to can conclude this, but is my way to see today.
Thank you. How are we doing on time, Christian? And Dan, you guys let us know.
There is another question that I want to ask. Organic farming. Yes, my family, we have the biggest surface under organic cultivation in Argentina, and we believe in organic. And also we cultivate organic certified some vineyards, and others are organic and we are not certifying, because I don't want to make organic because I want to put in the label organic. I want to make organic because I believe that is my commitment, where the place where I live, and is the way to do this activity sustainable. So I believe in organic cultivation. I work a lot under be the most sustainable that I can. But for me, it's not important, for example, in Zuccardi to put in the label, because it's the way to improve my quality. No, I don't want that people buy Zuccardi because it's organic. I want the people buy Zuccardi because it's a great producer. And like a producer, I believe that organic and sustainable cultivation is strategic for the future and for the next generations.
I think that's a great message that you bring, and speaks volumes about your family and how they've treated their land for many, many years now, and how they treat their people and take care of one another, so that there is something left for the next generation to care for as well. So I think that wraps it up for time, if that's okay with everyone. I know we could all sit and listen to Sebastian for much longer, and we'll have more opportunity in the future. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Sebastian and everyone. It was
Thanks,
great.
everyone.
Thank you.
Great
Thank you so much.
partners, wine cellars. Love you guys. Thank you to Wine Bell.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Sebastian.
much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.